All right, hey there, I'm Chief Meteorologist Jason Smith with an update here on Next Weather, and today is the day before the 20th anniversary of Hurricane Katrina, and it's a storm I remember tracking very well here on Fox 10 News, and wanted to take a look back at where we were the day before Hurricane Katrina made landfall. And this is a look at the forecast track, and this was actually issued a couple of days before. It would have been the day before the system made landfall, but the forecast pretty much followed this track. It was spot on 2 days in advance. There weren't many surprises with Hurricane Katrina. A lot of people say, hey, we weren't prepared, we weren't warned, but the information was out there. It was just a matter of folks tuning into television and that kind of thing. And locally in our area, we got the edge of this thing. And I know it was bad in Biola Battery and Pascagoula, but you know, it was New Orleans and the Mississippi coast, especially Biloxi, Gulfport, and over to Bay St. Louis, it really got hit the hardest with this tropical system. And what I want to do is show you what the storm looked like on this exact day. And I'm going to start it back at the beginning here so you can see a wider view of Hurricane Katrina. This is one of the not necessarily the best shot, but definitely a very great satellite picture here of what was happening with Hurricane Katrina on the 28th into the early part of the afternoon. And so the sun was in the western sky on this particular shot here. And what was happening was that you could see the stadium effect inside the eye. I'll actually zoom in, and you can see that the left side of the eye is shaded. That's because the sun's a bit in the western sky, and the east side of the eye is illuminated. So you can kind of envision that the sun is in an angle here, and it looks like you're looking down into a stadium. And this was when Katrina was at its strongest point. Winds of 175, and the pressure, the fifth lowest with any Atlantic system on record at 902 millibars. So Katrina was at its worst the day before it made landfall. And that's what was creating all the surge and the potential for damage, was that the surge was building, the wave heights were building, the swell was building today, but it's tomorrow that it was at its worst. So yeah, you can see just how well formed and symmetrical this thing was. It was a monstrous, terrible system to track. And talking about the advisories and the information, you can see the winds were at 175 with higher gusts, and it was a category 5 on the Saffir-Simpson scale. It was moving northwest at 13 miles an hour, and hurricane force winds extended out over 105 miles from the center of the storm. The pressure was 906 at this particular point. And we're going to take a look at this advisory in detail here, because I want to show you some of the key things that we have actually with this. Coastal storm surge and flooding of 18 to 22 feet above tide levels, locally as high as 28 feet. That was the prediction. This was in advance, and it actually played out exactly like that. We saw storm surge 27 to 28 feet in places like Waveland, past Christiane, and over along the Mississippi-Louisiana line. So locally, we actually saw the storm tides that were being predicted by the Hurricane Center. So again, it wasn't a surprise that the levees would be overtopped. Some of that information was going out up to 3 days in advance that we were going to see this type of situation. And, you know, it was just a terrible storm. It was moving northwest at 13. Winds were at 175. The pressure was at 906 with this particular advisory. And the pressure actually fell to 902 later that evening. Hurricane force winds extend out to 105 miles from the center. Okay, this was really important with Katrina. The size of the storm made a huge difference because it was so large. The hurricane force wind field was 105 miles from the center. That's a giant hurricane. And the tropical storm force winds were 205 miles from the center. So a bigger system can cause way more surge and way more damage than a smaller system. And the Saffir-Simpson scale, what category it is, doesn't weigh into that equation. The category is based on wind speed, and so you can have a really small compact 5 that doesn't do as much from a storm surge perspective as a large one. So that was one of the big takeaways from Hurricane Katrina. But it's a storm I remember covering very well here on Fox 10 News, coming in the morning of the 29th and covering it. We covered it over the weekend and the lead up to it too. Definitely was an impactful storm with category 1 to 2 type damage from a wind perspective over Mobile County, but the surge values were much higher than usual, especially from Alabama Port to Biola Battery to Pascagoula, and that was the big problem with Katrina. It actually made landfall as a category 3, which doesn't sound as bad as a 5, but it brought the surge of a 5+ as it came ashore. So those are some takeaways from Hurricane Katrina. Nicholas Herboso is going to have some of our great archived footage. He's been looking through the archives, he's digitizing it. He's going to show it to you on Next Weather tomorrow.